Hi, I'm Bruce Burke. Welcome to the latest episode of the hashtag Pay podcast. Today I have with me as my guest Chris Butler from IPsoft. Chris, welcome to the Pay podcast. How are you this morning?
Great. Thank you for having me.
And so, Chris, your role at IPsoft, can you tell us about your role and a little bit about what IPsoft does?
Absolutely. So first, IPsoft, we've been around for a bit over 20 years now. Started in New York by an NYU professor of machine learning and kind of automation, Chetan Dubey. And so his real goal was to basically, when we talk about IT management, how do we start to automate all these tasks that are very rote or end up being something that a machine can take over, right? Because we want to leave the really creative and innovative work to human beings. And so at first, we did a lot around IT managed services, and then started building tools for the company itself to be able to automate more and more of the workflow so that human beings are really doing the hard problems rather than the easy ones. And so that was the last 20 years. We came out with something called IP Center, which is really an IT management platform. That is, over the last couple of years, turned into something that we refer to as OneDesk. And then inside OneDesk, the last couple of years, we've started building out a system that we call Amelia, that is a conversational agent. And that's really, we'll talk about more about what does it mean to do conversational agents, but really, how do you provide a front end to all of these IT management services for employees, customers, and partners that's much easier to understand. And so my role at IPsoft is Chief Product Architect. And what that means is, my background tends to be 19, 20 years of product management experience. I've worked at companies like Microsoft, Kayak, and Waze. And then I even started my own company, but it's always been kind of, very product focused, very much how do we link the day-to-day strategy to, or how do we link strategy to the day-to-day actions that we take, the work that we do. And as Chief Product Architect at IPsoft, I'm really sitting between three main teams. One is the R&D team, right? How do we build the best in class, the state-of-the-art platform for conversational agents? Then the cognitive team, which is how do we build out these professional services for clients as they implement something like a conversational agent? And then work with the sales team to make sure that we're selling the right thing, that we're learning from the field. And because these are enterprise sales cycles, they tend to take a bit longer. And so just making sure that we're shepherding it with the right type of technical understanding for those companies. And so that's kind of my role within IPsoft. But I work with a lot of different people. My role tends to bridge across a lot of different teams within the organization as well. But I do mostly focus on Amelia. I do a little bit around OneDesk as well. But Amelia, I think, is really the really interesting thing that we're working on right now around conversational agents.
So how did you get drawn to the conversational aspect of it? What's your background, and how did you come to where you are now with your interest in this?
Yeah, absolutely.
On a personal level.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I've always been really interested in the more technical side of things. So when I was in high school, the person who taught me C programming in high school ended up leaving because he was a student. And I ended up teaching the rest of our class when it came to C programming. And so I've always been technically interested in things. When I joined Microsoft as a program manager, I still worked on highly technical projects. And so I've always been interested in that. That's meant that trying to utilize technology, trying to, especially things like data and analytics in the day-to-day to make things better or to make things more efficient or to be able to make better decisions in general, that's always been very interesting to me. And so from that perspective, even the restaurant startup that I started was really an open table competitor, but used a lot of interesting analytics techniques to do a better job of organizing the dining room floor. And so this was pretty groundbreaking at the time. Unfortunately, it didn't end up working out as a startup, but it was something I learned an awful lot about the idea of not just data science, but kind of machine learning and how to utilize these things for really building amazing experiences or products. And so the job I had right before IPsoft was working at a design consultancy called Philosophy. And so we did a lot of work from an innovation standpoint, emerging technology standpoint for very large companies. And my role there was director of AI and product strategy. And so really, figuring out what were the types of things that we should be building with these types of emerging technologies was at the core of my work. And one project in particular, we were doing a project for PwC and Google and in a couple different verticals, including retail and a few others. But the part that I worked on probably the most, probably for a year and a quarter, was around field service operations. And so it was this idea of, if people are not familiar with FSO or field service operations, it's really that anytime that you can't take something that you bought and then return it to have it fixed or replaced, so like an AC system inside of a building or a refrigerator, or in the case of our reference customer, for this case, it was gas station repair. And so people need to go on site, they need to troubleshoot, and then they need to fix something. And it's not just these field techs that are doing this, but also dispatchers at the home base, the warehouse, a bunch of other people are all involved in this. And so one of the things we did as an experiment was to really see if conversational agents would help the field tech do a better job of getting information, things like that. And so back then we called them chatbots, and they were pretty rudimentary. They were really bad, actually. A couple years ago, the chatbot wave of interest basically died because they were all pretty horrible, right? A lot of the time people were just jamming web forms into conversational context that didn't make any sense. What we ended up doing, though, was that even though the field tech was not necessarily the right place to have a conversational agent, the dispatcher was, right? So we did a lot of interesting work around prediction of like when a job was ready to be assigned to a field tech. Things like constraint optimization around the field tech scheduling, which actually is very similar to managing a dining room floor from a restaurant standpoint. But we created the concept of a conversational agent that we ended up naming Patrick in this case. And it was not just about the field tech, but it was about this group chat where Patrick and the dispatcher would work on the job at first. And then Patrick, when it was appropriate, would start to include field techs, people from the warehouse, senior field techs that could help offer advice or thoughts on the troubleshooting, and really was like the manager of the work, but also interjecting in this group chat in a way that was really helpful and when it was appropriate. And so for me, that's when I really started to see conversational agents as a very interesting thing. And that kind of led me to IPsoft, where Amelia is really this kind of the best in class solution for large scale enterprise conversational agents. And what's interesting about that is that part of this is conversation, right? Conversations tend to seem very non-deterministic, and for people that are not familiar with that term, it just means that it feels like, unless you have enough context, it can feel very random, and it can feel like it's taking a lot of different paths. And because organizations don't have perfect context about their customers or their employees, they don't actually know the context all the time that people are calling about. And so what happens is that they'll be asking for something in a way that is in their own jargon or their own terminology, their own words. And they'll be asking for it in a way that may not be very easily understood by a computer or a machine. And that's where a lot of the NLP, NLU work goes into from the standpoint of IPsoft. But then on the other side of that, you actually need to join that with this deterministic or set process, standard operating procedure, policy, regulations, et cetera, that a large organization, especially when we talk about like fintech, finance, and banking, there's a specific way that you need to do everything. And so there's this interesting tension between how people want to ask for something from an NLP, NLU side, or from like just whenever they talk to a customer support agent, they ask for things in a very human way. But now how do you link that to this more deterministic or set process for these large institutions? And so that's what Amelia is trying to go after, is this delicate balance between those two things. Now, what I'd say is the context is highly important, and that's why a key aspect of Amelia, and when we talk about conversational agents at IPsoft, is it's not just about the idea of, say, the NLP, NLU, understanding your intent, extracting the right pieces of information or entities, but it's how do we then take some action inside the environment that could be hard for someone to figure out on their own. So an example could be that, with, say, banking applications, I totally know how to do things like check my bank account balances. I know how to, maybe do bill pay. But setting up something like a recurring ACH payment might be more difficult for me. And the reason why is I don't do it very frequently, right? Like maybe I only do it a handful of times during a year, if at all, right? And so what these apps are requiring people to do, or these web services requiring people to do, is that they have to relearn this thing over and over again. This happens also in the IT space too, right? Like if you have to go and reset your password or ask for a new device or something like that, it can be very complicated because I don't know where to go necessarily. I don't know what information I need. But if I talk to a human being, I can at least convey what I need. And then that human being will usually go off and take care of it. And that's usually the IT org or a customer support person. But once you introduce a conversational agent like Amelia, you're able to actually offload a lot of this L0, L1 work to a machine. And that allows these people that are highly skilled, highly paid, IT experts, or these customer support people that are really good at handling customers, to do the really hard cases or the really anomalous ones where you need human judgment in some way. And so that's really, really important when it comes to conversational agents.
In relation to going back to the contextual and how does AI deal with, if you just think about U.S., right?
Yeah.
People people's behavior, speech, and the way they deal with things is totally different than someone in Southern California, someone in Florida, someone in the Midwest. How does AI kind of does it address that, and does it kind
Yeah,
of make adjustments for that? And how do you go about that? I mean, how do
that's right.
you determine that?
I think what's interesting is that at the core of conversational agents is really human-centered design, right? So rather than forcing a human being to go off and learn some new system that was built for the benefit of the developer or for the system itself, it's saying that we're going to meet you wherever you are and try to understand what you're asking for. And so we talk about the way that the machine learning works, or the NLP NLU works with regards to conversational agents, is that you're using actual ways that people ask for things. So that could be via text or via voice. And you're collecting all this information to then train a model so that based on not matching exactly the same wording or the same speech pattern, but things that sound like that or have a pattern like that can then be identified as wanting a particular action to take place, or what we refer to as an intent, right? And so that's what's really important about the AI or the machine learning aspects of this, is that you're actually learning from real human beings saying or asking for these things, and then you're turning that into some type of action. Now, there's a couple different problems that end up happening within the world around NLPLU. The first one is this kind of cold start problem. And so the way we've tried to address that is we've built a lot of different skills for a lot of different types of companies, especially things like banking and finance. And so we have a set of skills that are basically available as a starting point, where it has what we refer to as utterances, which is basically text that people have said, to then train intent models. And then we have standard processes that are more generalized for almost any type of environment or organization. And so that cold start problem is something that is hard to get over, but because we have all this experience, we're able to provide that as a benefit, right? And then the second thing is this idea of drift. And so this is a concept that whenever you train a machine learning model, you're using data from the past, right? You don't know what the data is in the future. You're trying to now do inference or prediction about, based on data that you're seeing today, you're trying to use a set of generalized patterns or rules that the machine has learned to then take action. Now, what that means, though, is that people may, over time, start to alter the way they ask for things, right? They may use different terminology. There may be things that, over time, they change the way it works. Or you may have just trained on a subset of the information that you could have had to be able to understand all of the special cases. And so that's the other part that we tried to build into Amelia, is really not only the idea that how do you now do analysis of how well things are working. We use something that's not industry standard yet, but I think it will be more and more interesting to companies as it goes forward. Generally today, NLP and NLU systems tend to use utterance to intent accuracy matching. And that's really just the first part. That's the part that you're trying to understand semantically what the machine is, what the person is trying to say to the machine and what they're trying to get done. But there's the whole other part, which is that now when you follow this business process, how do you actually get to the end of that business process to be successful for that customer? And so ACE scoring really takes that into account, right? And so what we're trying to do is we've built out things like journey analytics, the ability to do analysis of transcripts, so that as time goes on, when you first deploy an Amelia skill, for example, whether it's one that we've built for you or one that you build yourself, you can then monitor over time to say, okay, well, here's a set of utterances that we didn't expect originally, but we should now retrain our intent model so that they are triggering the right intent. Same thing with, we found a special case that actually we want Amelia to handle. So building the special case into that business logic is really important. Or, you could even go further when we talk about context. The more systems that you have internally that collect either user profile information or behavioral information, the more that can be utilized to provide more context to the process to then take care of things better for that customer. So the example I like to use a lot of the time is around things like password reset, right? So there's a lot of different ways people can ask for password reset, and it's fairly ambiguous within an enterprise environment. Because there could be multiple passwords, right? So getting clarification on which system in particular is something that usually these conversational agents need to do. Now, what's interesting is that if you have behavioral information or profile information about that, this person only has access to these 5 out of 20 systems, and the last 5 places they tried to log in are these systems. You start to add context that will allow for that machine to much more easily bridge that gap between the non-deterministic speech that person is using and what the end outcome or action they're trying to do. And so that's where context really comes in, and is super, super important for these types of things.
In relation to, I know, Amelia is focused on essentially the front end and trying to comprehend and understand and, use clues and that sort of thing to, gain information. But does IPsoft also act as the interconnect to say Amelia was talking to a customer for an onboarding, and there was, KYC regulations, and there was a back-end automated KYC platform, which I understand you probably don't provide. But would you be able to contextually interconnect to that platform to gain information? Run it through the platform. Comes back with a positive. Go ahead and add that piece to the customer file. Except, a process, so to speak, is
Yeah.
Do you work in that realm, or do you kind of stop at here's where we, how far back do you go? I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because our roots in IT automation and management, I mean, we go all the way to the deep back-end systems that are required to be able to allow a large organization to run. Like we were just talking maybe 2 months ago with a particular organization that's been around for decades, maybe even close to 100 years at this point. But they had 850 different systems that they had to manage from an IT perspective, right? And the thing is that in this particular case, we were talking about onboarding and offboarding employees. And so in those cases, it can be very difficult to make sure, one, you've set them up with everything that they need to be set up. And so generally there's like a checklist that's in a Word document somewhere that someone needs to follow. And so when it comes to Amelia, is that Amelia, because of not only the fact that it has its own integration framework, which we use something called Apache Camel as like an open source integration framework, but also because it's part of OneDesk, which is this kind of overall integration system with other IT systems, you're able to, as a conversational agent, as the front end, find out what the person needs and then go through the actual steps while adhering to things like regulations, to compliance, auditability, and then go and take action in the environment. And so, any of these things you're talking about where inside financial institutions, there's a real need for making sure that everything is checked off with regards to compliance to regulations. And so it's really, what's amazing about these types of conversational agents is that they're able to spit out a transcript that says it followed the exact steps that we're supposed to, and here's the end outcome that happened, without that person having to learn some type of convoluted set of tools, right? They're just talking to this conversational agent, but they're doing something that is not only highly auditable and regulated, but also getting the thing done for them. And that's really the main point, right? Is that when you have like an environment where it's 850 systems, as someone who's just like a regular person that's not an IT expert, I have no idea where to even start sometimes. And so by being able to ask that conversational agent, the conversational agent can definitely point you in the right direction, but we feel like that's low value, right? The high value ROI cases for this are where Amelia can actually, from end to end, handle an actual customer request. And that's exactly why integration with back-end systems like those are really, really important. And that's, I think that's why, we're presenting it at the Pay Symposium, is because of the fact that we do, I think, some really amazing work in this case, especially because sometimes, even in things like insurance, banking, there's a lot of, kind of systems and processes that are hard for people to understand, to follow, or to even interact with. And so I think when we talk about the idea of AI and AI explainability, that's where conversational agents can do a really amazing job, is that people can actually query the system to find out why it's doing something, rather than being given a report that I then have to, the burden of understanding is on me. Whereas with conversational agents, it's reversed, right? The burden is actually on the agent to make sure it's explainable to me.
Yeah, and a lot of the things you're talking about there, for instance, buying a home, it's not an exercise that people are used to. They don't.
That's right.
Often, it's not like going to and making a.
I don't do that every week, right? Like I'm not applying for a mortgage every single week of my life, right? I have no idea, other than those small sets of times that I have to do this, right?
And there's no, there's no manual as to how to go buy a house and, what the steps are and everything else. You're led into these, different places and different people,
right.
and whole different set of language, whole different set of terms and, mounds of paperwork,
Yeah.
So it's having someone to navigate that for you. So I've always thought as the conversational agent as that chat bot that has been so bad over the years.
Yeah,
I've dealt with them all. You go to a car site and you're looking at cars and something springs up and all they wanted to do is fill out a form so somebody can contact you, that sort of thing, and that's terrible. But I never really thought of it as a wheelhouse or a hub of a wheelhouse that manages both human and data and maybe different teams and works as a hub, so to speak. And I think that's a something that your company's doing that it doesn't seem like the other companies are onto that. It seems like they're focused on just making a better agent that converses better, not really that
yeah.
uh, controls the situation, or manages the and sees it all the way through. The throughput of that, I'm sure, saves a ton of money and a ton of time for the
That's
people
right.
that
That's
previously did that sort of thing.
That's exactly right. And again, I think like a lot of companies, if you look at some of the tools or components that are being made available from like Google, like Dialogflow, AWS Lex, or Azure Lewis, like those are all really great steps towards the natural language understanding and processing part of it. It's about taking an utterance and matching an intent. But once you do something like that, you then also need to integrate with all of these, not convoluted necessarily, but like required processes. And so what ends up happening is that what we found, at least whenever people try to build these things from the ground up internally, is that they have like a toy example where they use one of these services. They're able to get intent kind of recognition working, but then they realize, oh, we now need to add this statefulness, and we need to add this whole process that we utilize as human beings to the machine. And so they end up having to build all of these tools, including business process networks, which is something we support, this idea of integrations with different systems. There's a bunch of things that you need to build to be able to actually have a functional system. And that's why, when we think about Amelia has really been built in a very opinionated way because we work with so many large companies, right? We work with so many enterprise, large organizations that have really, really complicated processes that have very, very high availability needs. And so usually using these other systems that are maybe more modular, you end up not getting the complete solution that you need, right? And so that's why we focused on this so much. And so, yeah, I think that's really important when we talk about how do you have a conversational agent that is not just there to be kind of like witty and funny. I actually think that, maybe this is an unpopular opinion within the industry, but I think actually persona or personality matters less than the actual functionality, right? Most of the time, people do not call up customer support to hear a funny joke, right? Like that's not why they call them. They call them because they need to get something done. And if they could avoid it, they would actually not talk to anybody, right? So I think from that perspective, focusing on the functionality, focusing on creating good dialogues and good conversations that are succinct and to the point and gets the job done for people, that's what people want. I think it's great if you can add a little bit of personality to it. And it's definitely something we do. We have customers that, are doing things like segmentation by age, things like that, where having Amelia speak differently or use more emojis, depending on the age of the person, I think is a fine experiment. And I think it works from a brand perspective for some groups. But I would say overall, what really matters the most is how are you allowing this agent to take action on behalf of the person? And how is that agent doing that as efficiently as possible? So, we have conversational designers and linguists that are focused on this, right? And it's always great to hear their perspective. Whenever I think I put together a succinct conversation, people tend to be overly wordy in the way that they build things, right? And so the thing I've been trying to be better about since I've been working with them is it's like, do you really need all this information? Can we build a kind of shared context between the customer and the agent, the conversational agent, that allows much more rapid fire communication so that, even if for example, we've seen cases where a conversation with a customer support person will take 15 minutes to do something, right? And part of that is because the customer support agent is not only asking about things and maybe doing some different things about like how they're talking to people, but it's also the issue that they have to go and manually do a bunch of steps within systems. We're able to take those things and get it done in like 2 minutes, right? And that's with the lag to these legacy systems that we have to integrate within these environments, right? And so I think from that perspective, people appreciate that, how fast that is. And the added benefit there is that these people that were on the call for like 15 minutes, they get backed up, right? There's only so many people that you can hire, that you can train. And, there tends to be very bad retention or really bad attrition when it comes to those roles as well. So you're constantly retraining people. So what you need to be doing is you're also taking something like, we have Telefonica in Peru as one of our customers. And so they have been able to take call times that were people were waiting for, and this is a B2C type of case around telecom, mobile phone questions like about bills and stuff like that. And the wait time was like 50 minutes, 50 minutes, right, to talk to an actual human being. And they've been able to take that and basically make it 5 minutes to a human being. But the conversational agent is able to take care of a large majority of the cases, and then when necessary, escalate to the human being. And that's what you want. You want the human being to be able to answer as quickly as possible because their time is very valuable. You want them handling the hardest cases, but you want Amelia to take care of everything else.
So when a person is interacting with a conversational agent, I found myself more and more using voice to interact with my machines. As probably everyone has. There's a lot of Google Homes and Google Assistants and ad infinitum, right? Amazon and everybody else. Siri, Cortana, et cetera, et cetera. Based with the idea of people's dialect and not being used to speaking to machines, so it's haltingly, and they're thinking of what they're trying to say as they're saying it because they're not used to speaking with machines, and people texting or typing into a window with spell check and regional dialects, grammar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Which is the better way to interface with a conversational agent?
Well, I think it depends on the context, right? Like one of the problems that you're outlining here, especially with devices, is that while they're trying to get to the point that they can have a deep kind of semantic understanding of a conversation, they tend to be fairly syntactic right now. And what that means is that they tend to be very keyword based, right? So people start to adapt their patterns of speech to the device rather than the device matching the speech patterns of people. And so that's part of the problem, right? And so I think these devices are going to continue to get better. Something that we work on an awful lot is how do we allow for the most natural language possible? So how do we allow people to say, actually, never mind, I don't want to do this? Or how do we allow them to switch contexts very easily, even between domains? Like if I'm asking a question about PTO at one point in an HR context, how am I allowed to now move over and say, actually, I'm having a problem with my email and go to an IT context? So that type of thing is really, really important. What I'd also say is that, what's interesting is that there's going to be two ways to go about this, right? So one is that machines are not people. And so there's a lot of discussion, I think, within the community, especially around NLP, NLU, or these types of devices at home, is should you be polite to them or not, right? And this is a tricky question, right? Because I think part of me says that when we talk to machines, right, we should be doing it in a way that feels efficient and natural for us. And so I think it's okay that we bark, commands at machines because they're not human beings, right? And so the idea of being polite to a device, I think, is what's referred to as a skeuomorphism in the design community. And a skeuomorphism is essentially where you're trying to bring people from one mode of understanding to another mode of understanding because of innovation or kind of continuation of something. And so a good example of that is that for a very long time, there would be a disk icon on a button to mean that it was saving something, but it was never being saved to a disk, right? And so that's a skeuomorphism. It means that people understood what a disk meant. It meant saving, even though the disk no longer is actually what it is. It's like the idea of the icon on the iPhone for your phone. It looks like a handset, but since when have handsets ever looked like that? Since people have iPhones now, right? And so that's a skeuomorphism. And so I believe that actually being polite to machines, especially through a voice interface, is a skeuomorphism of us talking to other people. And so I don't know. I think like we're going to go towards the direction that whatever's natural and efficient, we're going to do when we talk to people, when we talk to machines. I think we're going to still talk to people in the way that we talk to people, which is not that way, right? Now, when we talk about the difference between text and voice, what really matters is context. So let's say, for example, we were building a conversational agent, say for some type of aviation company or a company that did like travel and flights and things like that, like an airline. What we would do is that it's actually not just one, it's not just voice, it's not just text. It's actually all of the above, right? Because if I'm at work, I actually, unless I'm on a conference call with someone, I don't want to talk to my computer. right? We found that actually as part of the philosophy work that we did. People don't want to talk to their computers. They don't want to say the trigger words to be able to wake their computer up and then do something. It just feels awkward in an enterprise or organizational environment. And so they want to use probably text chat over web, right? But when I'm on the phone, say I get into the airport though, and I have a question, because I'm walking around, I'm probably pulling things with my hand, like my bag. I want to then use voice. And so it's not one or the other, right? It's what's appropriate for the context of your customer's need, and then how do you service that? And the thing that we've done, basically Amelia can operate over any channel that is text or voice. And so we do a lot of integrations with old school call center, IVR type of systems. But also we do a lot of things where it's web chat or overlays on their websites, or even integration into systems like Microsoft Teams or Slack or Salesforce or whatever, right? What we're trying to do is we're trying to make these conversational agents available where they need to be. And that's the point, is it's actually going to be omni-channel. It's going to be everywhere that you can, because there's always going to be particular cases. You might have different usage of these different channels depending on your use case, but in reality, you want all of them, right?
So that brings up the question of in these conversational agents, are they using geolocation and other sensors from the device to kind of come to that conclusion to help the person the most, right? Can you see they're at the airport? Can you see they're can you tell by the speed they're moving, they're driving a car, the voice is probably the best way, that sort of thing,
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's, so yes, you could do that. I haven't seen that as much. And so what I would say is that it's actually self-selecting, because it's up to the customer or the employee to decide, right? Like they either call the phone number or they log on to web chat. And that's the self-selection that happens. Now, what's interesting is that I can change that context halfway through a conversation though, right? So what could happen is that I could be doing web chat. I have to run to the airport. I then call into the phone number to continue that conversation, right? And so that's where this idea of tracking information over conversations and allowing for the switch of mode of conversation is really important, and something we built into Amelia, right? So that's what I would say, is that yes, it's always good to add more context, right? And but I think when the types of implementations I've seen so far, less of the use of things like actual location from a GPS, say on the phone, or the IMU or the different parts of the device that allow for that type of like motion. I mean, I used to work for Waze, so we were highly dependent on those things to provide context in that case, right? And so there was a real issue there too around how do you, one of the things I worked on there was the advertising platform. And so how do you advertise to someone that's not supposed to be interacting with their phone at all, right? Is a very hard question. And so in that idea though, like context is incredibly important. And so if it made sense for a conversational agent to have that type of context, you could build it in. But a lot of the time, it's actually more important to understand who the person is from either single sign-on, identifying it through their phone number, plus verifying via some other information. But that tends to be the way that we actually get customer context or employee context is through those types of things.
Okay. And so where are we going? We've got a new decade just around the corner, right?
Yeah.
We're in August now, right? And we're less than 6 months away from 2020. They promised we'd be flying in cars.
Well, I hate to tell you this,
right?
they're already flying cars. They're already flying cars, right? They're just called helicopters. And they're really loud, yes. And they're not efficient, and they're very expensive. So anyways.
But, where do you see conversational assistance and conversational commerce obviously is a great part of that. It seems like that's where the Apples and the Amazons and that stuff are focused. Where is it all going, and how fast are we really going with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first one is just there's been a lot of kind of progress when it comes to NLU, NLP types of tools and frameworks, and even just the theoretical side of this. There's been some really great papers around, say, attention-based machine learning models for this. And so what I'd say is that where we were a couple of years ago was not great. Where we are now is pretty good. I think that idea of pulling apart the semantic meaning of language from a text or voice standpoint is going to just get better. And so I think that's something that there's a lot of different groups that are kind of focusing in on that research side of that problem, and the entire industry is going to be benefited by that, right? So that's one thing. So the understanding of language is just going to get better and better. And I think, one of the things interesting is I do wonder, when we talk about like speech to text or even that idea of NLU and LP, I think it starts getting more commoditized as time goes on, right? Like I think it's going to be built into more and more of these tools. Now, the second thing that I think is interesting is that how do you actually provide better context? So one of the problems in voice right now, especially speech to text, is that one, if it's over phone, you tend to have a very low quality audio signal. But two, sometimes language is just ambiguous, right? In the way that people say things or the way that they, muffle their speech, things like that. There was an interesting case that we were just dealing with where people would be giving their phone number over the phone or the phone number that they were calling about over the phone. And they would actually pause for a very long time in the middle of saying something like 37. So they'd say 37. What they meant was 37. They didn't mean 307. And so this is something that's really hard for speech to text providers to pick up and deal with, because it's also hard for human beings to do that. Now, what's interesting is that if we add more context about what that number could be that that person is calling about, or things like, we deal with autocorrect, you were mentioning that earlier, as a really great example of machine learning that has kind of become integrated with most of our lives, is really things like grammar check and spell check or autocorrect, autocomplete are basically machine learning algorithms that provide context and use context to be able to provide us with like, what is the thing you're actually meaning to do? And so I think in those cases, right, speech to text is going to improve, but at the same time, we're going to inject more context about what we think the person is actually asking about, or what our bets of what the person is asking about, to be able to then, rather than having that error where, today, if they say 37, we actually misunderstand the number and then have to ask them to say it again. We just say, okay, you're calling about this number, but we're going to fix this error that you just did, right? And that's the real value of these types of systems. So I think that's something that we're doing kind of the preliminary stuff there right now, but that's going to be a big trend, is like, how do we include in the predictive powers of machine learning into this type of speech understanding and analysis is going to be really key. And then I think the last part is, how do we do a better job of understanding how to monitor or how to alter these systems through monitoring? And so what that means is, like I was saying before, where you need to add additional utterances, you need to add additional edge cases. One of the things that's kind of close to my heart right now, and something I'm really focused on, is how do we build a better way for people that are building these systems that, we've made great strides so that you don't have to be a programmer to build these skills anymore, right? Like you can lay them out with a visual tool, you can train models without using any code. But the next thing is like, how do we have this like punch list that says, here's something that you should be looking at as a human being? And then you, as a subject matter expert within one of these, within this organization, what is the right thing to do in this case? And it could be that, hey, a machine should not take care of this. It's actually a human being that should be making this decision. But it could also be like, oh, well, this is an interesting edge case. I want to now provide this. I would want to do this response. And not only how do subject matter experts kind of look at this punch list and then do that work, but also we're working on something that's called Copilot, which is, how do we have a system like Amelia actually help the customer support agent real time while they're in a conversation, right? So getting back to this kind of almost a team of people working on something together, where some of those agents are virtual. And so I think that's a trend that you're going to see a lot more. I think it's going to work a lot better in these examples of, like, say, customer support and other types of enterprise cases. This idea of a group chat with a conversational agent is really, really interesting to me. And so I think that's maybe the fourth trend, right, is this like group chat thing. So yeah, first trend, really better NLU, NLP, maybe even commoditization of it over the next couple of years. Second thing is, how do you include that in your predictive context and predictive capabilities? Third thing is, how do you get this like punch list so that you're really focusing on the things that matter? And then fourth thing is really, how are we really doing a better job of really providing a group chat, like a virtual agent being another coworker within the enterprise.
Okay. IPsoft is a sponsor of the Pay Symposium. That's August 20 and 21st at the Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. Chris is going to be giving a presentation, and IPsoft is sponsoring the welcome reception at 7 to 9 p.m. In the Pompeian Ballroom on the first day, the 20th, which is a Tuesday. We look forward to seeing everyone there. Chris, how can they get in touch with you? How can they get in touch with IPsoft?
Well, yeah. First of all, I mean, please come to my talk. It's going to be the last talk on the Tuesday at five at 5 o'clock, and I'm going to be talking about really creating a single customer view using cognitive agents. And so, you know, I'm going to really love to see people there, but also I'll be at the reception and happy to talk to people in person. And then if you want to get a hold of me, my email address is chris.butler@ipsoft.com. And you know, again, I'm always interested in not only networking with other people working on these problems, but also to hear about the problems, right? Like the problems that people are going through and trying to make sure that their customer support organizations, that their organizations are really considering these types of conversational agents is super interesting to me. And so would love to have that conversation at the symposium. I'm really looking forward to it.
It seems to be a very granular business and very, a very, infinite almost in scope, and I think it's really interesting. And, you seem like you really have, a boatload of knowledge about this. I'm really, and I see why you get the kudos you get when we mention you on the internet, LinkedIn and whatnot. I think the company is doing fantastic things, and I have found myself more and more talking to machines, right, and dealing with them, and I think a lot of other people have too, and I think that it's a growing trend that is not just based on the latest tech. It's not just a tech fad. I think it's an actual growth market, and I think IPsoft is way ahead of a lot of the competition just based on their understanding the project they've done with the depth of the different corporations that you've worked with, speaking of, dealing with multiple systems, multiple back end systems that you have to interact with. But that kind of stuff, I think, is just not being developed by others,
Well, here's the thing, right? Is like, I think my goal the reason why I'm so excited to be at IPsoft and really working on these problems is that, I think, like I said earlier, the real key thing is that at the center of conversational agents is really making sure that human beings get done what they need done, right? I think the thing that we tend to lose sight of when we look at all the machine learning and AI hype cycle that is kind of winding down right now is that people are realizing that it's not just about the machines, right? It's about the people, and machines are in the service of people, right? And so if we're not building things that are making humans' lives better or helping them in some way, I don't think we're working on the right things. And so there's always someone impacted, right? And so anyways, that's why I'm super excited about it. And definitely, I think IPsoft, we're definitely, I think we're working on some really awesome things, and I really hope to get the chance to show them off to people at the symposium.
Looking forward to it, Chris. I think that's going to be great. Folks, register today. Don't miss out. Chris IPsoft. It's going to be a great show. We've got some real leaders in the space coming in to talk about everything from conversational commerce to blockchain and beyond. Emerging markets, every aspect of the payments industry, from prepaid to the conversational commerce, everything in between. www.paysymposium.com. You can register today with code SAVE. That's two machines, SAVE, for a 30% discount. Thanks again to IPsoft and for you, Chris, for participating in the event and supporting the event. Really look forward to meeting you. Hope I have a lot of coffee before I do, because boy, you can go.
Thank you.
Great stuff. Great stuff. And really look forward to you guys' participation in the event. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a great day, Chris. I'll look forward to meeting you at the event.
All right, great. Yeah, thank you.